studies, and they say, we are only looking at factors X and Y and perhaps not Z, et cetera. How do you measure the harm done by convincing LGBTQ people that they are somehow broken and born bad? How do you measure the harm done of refusing, having doctrines that oppose condoms, which we know are a good thing, which would go a long way to reducing unwanted children, which would also reduce crime, which would also reduce the tendency for the sociopathic or the psychological damage that comes along with being in an unwanted child situation or an unhealthy situation, and the STDs that go along. Merely having this one little doctrine, hey, we're opposed to condoms, has this cascade effect that produces massive amounts of negativity that aren't particularly measurable. And even if you and I were in agreement that this is a bad idea, I don't know how you stack this up. And I don't judge people or religions on some kind of scale of, oh, well, you donated this much money, but you're opposed to. I don't do all this to say people are good or religions are good. I tend to go a little bit more discreet and say this action that you took was bad or this action that you took was good. That's why I can say that, yeah, religions have done plenty of good things. Actually, I would probably say that people have done good things on behalf of their religions, and that these ideas that instill good ideas in people, those ideas were still created by other people. Somebody had that idea. I mean, you can still do this sort of encouraging of thoughtfulness and care and stuff without appealing to anything supernatural or holy, just on the basis of who we are.
Okay, so well, if you can't measure, then how does that help your case? If you're admitting that you don't think we can measure a lot of these things or argue for what's more probable, then I don't see how that would actually help your case, because that would just be an admission that you don't know and we're just throwing our hands up in the air and guessing.
No, I'm not. Well, first of all, I'm not claiming that religions are necessarily more harm than good. I'm just saying I'm not convinced they're doing more good than harm. And some of this is going to come from samples and interactions that are not the sort of data that I could present to anybody, which is why there's not a study. When I'm looking at kids being thrown out of their homes, when I'm looking at the anti-trans hate and anti-gay hate and abortion laws and TROP laws and all these things that are commonly associated with religious views and religious doctrines, that's a whole lot of bad. Now, is it enough bad to outweigh any good they've done? I don't know. But I do know, or I'm convinced, to be fair, that we can have a hospital that does not adhere to any religious doctrine, and it will be better than a hospital that does adhere to religious doctrine, because the hospital without religious doctrine would be purely based on good, sound medical information and will not be adding in doctrinal things that are in opposition to science. So the hospital has to be better.
Well, it has to, but there's no real data to back that up, that somehow you remove the religious factor, that's better. In fact, going back to the data, the overwhelming amount shows that intrinsic religiosity does actually increase overwhelming benefits and whatnot. And again, I don't really care if you're not convinced by this. You can believe whatever you want. I'm going to go on what the data and what the science says at the end of the day. And the best explanation of this data is that intrinsic religiosity does increase overwhelming benefits. If we're just going to throw our hands up because, well, we can't measure, but I can look at one religious hospital and one that's not religious, and I know that non-religious hospital is better, we don't know that. I want to see an actual
study. We do know that. This is the thing. If you're claiming that a religious hospital is better than a secular hospital,
I'm actually not claiming that.
Well, I mean, if religiosity is a positive influence on society, wouldn't a religious hospital be better off than a secular one?
Well, it depends on what the studies would say. We actually have the data.
That's one of the things is what are people defining as good or better? Because there are plenty of people who think that banning abortion makes the world better. And I would argue that they are absolutely wrong. But there are also people who think that, having these religious ceremonies for the afterbirth after a miscarriage is a good thing because they're appealing to their God. And yet I would completely disagree that this is a good thing at all. They are traumatizing a woman who just suffered a miscarriage. And if you remove that religious aspect from that, and just go with the science, just go with the medicine, my argument is that is better, in much the same way that the law is better off when we stopped allowing spectral evidence.
Well, for one thing, I mean, with a lot of these hospitals, I mean, you're making a lot of assumptions here, and I'm not really seeing data to back it up. You're assuming that somehow if they do these ceremonies, I'm not really familiar with them because for preparing for the debate, I spent more time reading studies and looking at these random cases. But if we're going on that, I mean, that's assuming a lot of things without any actual psychological data to back it up. I mean, this is sort of like comparing weird things. As far as I've seen, most religious hospitals still do medical procedures. It's not that they're somehow saying, well, we have to pray instead of doing these. They're not somehow replacing medicine with like religious stuff. They still have doctors. They're still doing a lot of things. They're still doing a lot of good around the world. A lot of them are nonprofit for that matter. But again, that's really not the conversation.
But the good that they're doing is not in any way tied to the good that a doctor does. The good that a doctor does when they're following sound medical procedures is in no way tied to a religion. It's just science.
Right. I'm not denying that at all. And the religious hospitals don't prevent doctors from doing that.
Oh, yes, they do.
There's a huge amount of background noise from my people.
Okay, I'll try to fix that.
So there are hospitals that are preventing medical procedures that other doctors would do on the grounds of religious objections, right down to abortions, even in cases where the life of a mother is at stake. These sorts of things happen. By and large, every day at the Catholic hospital down the street, there's far more good being done than harm. I'm fine with that. But the good being done has nothing to do with religion or religiosity. It has to do with science and medicine and people going there to get a paycheck and help people. And you don't need religion for any of that. And when you add the religious component into it, it seems to me that you are at a how does it improve anything to add religion to medical treatment? I see plenty of areas where it detracts. I have not seen areas where it actually improves, apart from someone who's already religious having a chaplain of their preferred denomination come in and speak to them, which I'm not at all opposed to, because that is extra medical. I mean that is in addition to medical, not super medical. That is treatment. That is a psychological aspect. In much the same way that when I was in the military, I wish there weren't a chaplain service that was, paid, et cetera. But I understand that if you're going to put people in military and they come from different religions, you're going to need to make sure that they have, as part of their rights and individual freedoms to practice their religion, someone there to counsel them, someone from that.
Okay, well, again, I still want to press this matter. If a lot of these hospitals are not doing medical procedures, it's not like they're kicking them out. A lot of them are sending them to other hospitals, for example. If someone has a religious objection to performing an abortion, that's something different, separate, entirely different. And you asked what good would be doing taking could we still have the good without the religion? Again, a lot of these hospitals are still doing a lot of the medical work. They're not denying the medical procedures. They're still doing the surgeries. They're still taking in patients. Just because they may have an objection to an abortion does not mean they're denying patient care. And again, yes, it goes back to these studies on intrinsic religion. That does show overall increased benefits. The topic tonight is not, are religious hospitals better than non-religious hospitals? The topic tonight is religion beneficial? So I don't understand. I mean, how does it improve? I mean, intrinsic religion does actually improve overall.
So you're wrong in the sense that first of all, if they have religious objections to performing a procedure, saying that they will send a patient to another hospital ignores the truth about the situation. In most places around the world, apart from large rural areas, you have exactly one option of where you're going to go for medical treatment, just as you have exactly one option of where you're going to go to get your pharmaceuticals fulfilled. And so if the pharmacist doesn't want to provide you with the prescribed contraception, they're putting themselves ahead of the doctor on the basis of religion. And now we have added an undue burden to the individual. And in some cases, refusing these sorts of treatments has resulted in death. Now, is that the de facto standard? No, and I'm not denying that they do these other surgeries. But a hospital that treats the whole patient, that actually acts responsible with regard to medicine and medical ethics without injecting the religious doctrine, I would think that would be better than one that injects the religious doctrine and says, oh, no, I realize you're in pain and you just came here, but we can't treat you. We have to send you somewhere else. Because even though there's a medical procedure we could do, our religion prevents us from doing it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know how that helps your case. That just points out that a lot of Christians and different religious groups have put hospitals in places where there are no hospitals. So they've clearly increased the benefit. They've clearly created far benefits for that society, whatever. And again, what data shows that they're throwing out these countless numbers of patients on the side of the road. It just seems like you're citing these marginal cases which don't affect the overall general trend of what's actually going on here.
Except that the marginal cases are based entirely on religious doctrine, and all the cases that you want to cite as good have nothing to do with religious doctrine. Treating patients that show up using proper medical procedures is not a religious thing. There's no requirement of religion. So let's say there's 100 procedures that this hospital does, and there's 99 that this other hospital does. Now, if all of them are medically sound, and one of them is not being performed for religion, then 99 of those have nothing to do with religion. And the hospital that's refusing to do the one, the only effect that religion is having on that hospital is denying treatment to that patient.
Not necessarily, considering that it was intrinsic religion, which has caused increased ethical behavior and for many religious people to go into the world and put these hospitals in those places. Again, it goes back to the motivational factors we have here. We're talking about if religion has actually increased benefits in society. It has increased its ethical behavior. It has caused people to want to go out and cause more charity. Every study does show that that's the case. So
hospitals aren't charity. Hospitals are not charity. Hospitals are a necessary component of life. Doctors are getting paid incredible amounts of money because they study for years and they go in and do this. You want to talk about medicine as charities, you can go out and talk about Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders and stuff like that. The average hospital in the community, this is not a charity effort. This is essential public health services that needs to be regulated by a government and based on sound secular science.
Well, first of all, that's a political view.
Yes.
And again, we're not talking about politics. I'm pointing out that a lot of the reasons these areas have hospitals is because religious organizations saw a need and they went in there and they fulfilled it because they were motivated by their intrinsic religious beliefs, basically. So I don't see why jumping to politics is going to change what I'm trying to say here.
Okay, if I'm motivated by my intrinsic religious beliefs to build a hospital, and I profit from it, and I deny medical coverage to people based on my doctrine, is that better or worse than I'm motivated to do good in the world and I build a hospital and then I provide sound medical treatment?
Well, first of all, a lot of those hospitals are nonprofits. Well, I don't see what you're trying to say here.
I think he's asking.
I have motivation to do good. So I create a hospital and I rely on sound science without letting my personal religious convictions trump science. Versus you have a desire to do good and you build a hospital and you allow your personal religious convictions to trump what sort of treatment people can get. Which of those two situations is better?
Okay, this is a weird hypothetical, and I don't really see any sort of what examples are you trying to draw on here?
It's not a weird hypothetical. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I don't see how.
Situation number one, a hospital is built with the purpose of doing good because a community needs a hospital. And that hospital makes all of its decisions based on the best sound medical advice and understanding out there. Hospital number two, somebody was motivated to do good and they built a hospital. And instead of just relying on sound science, they also inject their religious doctrine in there, which ends up denying, let's just say, one patient coverage and treatment. Which of those two is better?
Okay, this is quite a setup question. How are, as I said before, what examples? How are they denying treatment? In what ways?
How about you ask it this way? Which one's more altruistic and which one is more restrictive? Is that okay?
It depends on what they're doing. I mean, you brought up, for example, I think you're going back to the abortion thing. So that's a completely different argument. I don't even want to open that can of worms right now.
Well, tough. It's relevant. You don't just say I don't want to open.
Well, I'm pro-life, so I'm not going to side with